Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and honestly, sometimes a bit intimidating world of PCI DSS compliance. We're going to take all that dense standard documentation and transform it into a clear, actionable playbook for digital transaction security. Basically, we're decoding the complex architecture of trust that literally keeps the global economy moving securely every single day.
But let's kick things off with a pretty simple question to set the stage here. Think about it for a second. What actually happens to your data when you swipe your card? Every time you grab a coffee or click Buy Online, your credit card info embarks on this incredibly complex, high-stakes journey. So how does the industry make absolutely sure that your information doesn't just fall right into the wrong hands?
Well, here is our roadmap for today to answer that. 1. How card payments actually work. 2. Payment systems and risks. 3. Merchant levels and compliance. 4. Scoping and network segmentation. And finally, 5. Securing the network. Let's get into it.
All right, Section 1, how card payments actually work. You see, we really have to understand the environment these rules operate in before we look at the rules themselves. So let's start with the life cycle of a basic swipe. Every transaction goes through a three-step dance. First up is authorization. You insert your card, and the merchant's bank, which we call the acquirer, asks your bank, the issuer, for approval. Simple enough. Second is clearing. This takes about a day, and it's where the purchase info is routed to a payment brand like Visa and then back to your issuer. And finally, settlement. This takes roughly 2 days, and it's when the actual funds are transferred over to the merchant.
Now, while that's happening, what are the bad guys actually looking for? They want your account data. And this is an umbrella term. It includes cardholder data, so your primary account number, your name, expiration date. But critically, it also includes sensitive authentication data, or SAD. That is the full track data on the magnetic stripe or the chip, your PIN block, and yep, those 3 little digits on the back of your card. That's the real prize for a hacker.
Which brings us to the absolute golden rule of PCI compliance. Once a transaction is authorized, you must never, ever store sensitive authentication data. Seriously, even if it's perfectly encrypted, storing SAD post-authorization is a massive violation. I mean, unless you're an issuer with a highly documented business justification, the rule is simple. If you don't need it, do not store it. Period.
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, Payment Systems and Risks. Let's look at the real-world systems processing these payments and the terrifying threats they face out in the wild. Because, let's be real, it's a jungle out there. The threats are constant, and they are always evolving. We're talking physical skimmers slapped right over legitimate terminals, or criminals using social engineering, pretending to be tech support just to swap out your terminal for a rigged one. They'll even dig through the trash for unsecured paper receipts. And here's one that happens all the time: intercepting data when mobile payment devices are hooked up to unprotected public Wi-Fi. Seriously, at an airport or a coffee shop, a skilled hacker can pull your data right out of thin air. So how do you fight back against that? Well, the absolute best defense is a PCI-listed point-to-point encryption solution, or P2PE. With this, the second you insert your card, the data is encrypted instantly, right inside the hardware of the terminal itself. It stays completely encrypted during transmission as totally unreadable gibberish. This renders intercepted data entirely useless to criminals, which drastically lowers the risk profile of your whole payment system. It's a game changer.
Let's jump to Section 3, Merchant Levels and Compliance. Now we're going to look at how the big payment brands decide exactly how strictly to evaluate different businesses.
As you can see, major payment brands classify merchants into 4 distinct levels, and it's based purely on annual transaction volume. A Level 4 merchant, that's a business processing under 20,000 transactions a year. But a Level 1 merchant is handling over 6 million transactions annually. And keep in mind, a single merchant can actually be placed in different levels for different brands, depending completely on how many transactions of each specific card type they process.
Now, if you are hitting that massive Level 1 volume, a simple self-assessment questionnaire, yeah, that's not going to cut it. You need a qualified security assessor, a QSA, to come in and conduct a rigorous annual on-site audit. This results in a full report on compliance, or ROC. And let me tell you, it's a massive, incredibly stressful undertaking to prove that every single requirement is actively being met across your organization. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, Scoping and Network Segmentation. Because before you start securing a network, you really have to know exactly where the boundaries are, right? And that's what scoping is all about.
It is the vital first step of any assessment. You're basically figuring out exactly what parts of your business touch the cardholder data environment, the CDE, which we like to think of as the vault. Scoping identifies any system component that stores, processes, or transmits account data. But it also includes systems that provide security services to the vault, or even random systems that don't hold data at all, but just happen to have unrestricted connectivity to the ones that do.
Because of that, assessors live by a very strict motto: treat every system as guilty until proven innocent. When you are preparing for compliance, you have to assume your entire organization is in scope. You assume everything is in scope until you can definitively verify through effective segmentation that specific components truly cannot connect to or impact the security of your vault.
And this is exactly why a flat network is an absolute nightmare for an audit. In a flat network, everything is exposed, which means your entire corporate network is in scope. That's incredibly high risk and will cost you massive amounts of time and money to assess. Instead, you want network segmentation. This uses firewalls to isolate the CDE from the rest of the corporate noise, shrinking your scope down and making your assessment infinitely more manageable.
All right, we've made it to Section 5, Securing the Network. Let's zoom all the way in on Requirement 1 of PCI DSS version 4, which outlines the strict technical rules for the hardware protecting your newly segmented vault. To keep that vault safe, your firewalls need to be configured perfectly. Requirement 1 essentially mandates that you explicitly restrict both inbound and outbound traffic to only what is absolutely necessary for your business to function. Everything else, it gets hit with an explicit deny-all by default. You have to install firewalls between your trusted cardholder data environment and literally any untrusted networks, whether that's the open internet or just your general employee network.
Now here's a mandate that catches a lot of folks off guard. Treat all wireless networks as inherently untrusted. Honestly, it doesn't matter what fancy encryption your wireless network uses, PCI DSS considers it a risk. Therefore, you must have firewalls installed between all wireless networks and your vault, explicitly denying that traffic by default unless there's a highly specific authorized business purpose.
And listen, compliance is not a set it and forget it kind of deal. It requires vigilant, highly documented upkeep. You have to document every approved port and protocol. You absolutely must review your firewall rules at least every 6 months to make sure they still make sense. On top of that, you need to implement anti-spoofing measures to block forged IP addresses, and you got to mask your internal IP addresses and routing info from anyone on the outside looking in.
So we've built the architecture of trust around your network perimeter today. We understand how the data flows, how to shrink your scope, and how to lock down those firewalls. But I'm going to leave you with this thought. Mastering Requirement 1, that's literally just the first step in a much larger, frankly, fascinating compliance journey. There are 11 more rigorous requirements out there, securing everything from vulnerability management to physical access to the servers. The true test of your data security is just beginning. So the question is, are you ready for the rest of the playbook?